Roy Spencer, almost 30, lead designer at a solid but not famous agency. We're not winning global awards, but the client list is respectable and payroll never misses. Started here as a clueless junior and somehow never left this place shaped most of my adult life. For years, the studio ran like a tuned engine. The creative floor felt alive, open space, scattered desks, tension rising as deadlines closed in, keyboards rattling, design debates happening mid-walk, servers whispering in the background, coffee in every hand, ideas flying across the room. Status was earned through output. Deliver something brilliant, you got recognition. Miss the mark, you heard about it. Everything else was irrelevant. We had guys, we had girls, we had young interns and old veterans. Everyone got along because the work came first. The anchor of our whole department was a guy named Roy. Roy was in his 50s, a design legend from the days before everything was digital. He could sketch a perfect logo in 30 seconds with a ballpoint pen on a napkin. He was gruff, didn't mince words, and had zero patience for bullshit. Looked like a guy who could fix a truck engine and then critique font kerning with equal expertise. When I first started, I was terrified of him. He tore my first big project to shreds in a review, told me it was unfocused, cowardly, and looked like it was designed by a committee of beige enthusiasts. I was devastated. But then, after the meeting, he pulled me aside, sat me down at his desk, pulled out a notepad, and spent an hour showing me where I went wrong. Wasn't mean about it. It was just pure, unfiltered professional advice. The idea has to have balls, kid. Even if it's for a soft product, it needs conviction. That was Roy, tough, but always fair. His only loyalty was to good design. Our boss, the studio director, was a pragmatic guy. He handled the clients and the money, and let us handle the creative. As long as projects were on time and clients were happy, he stayed out of our hair. Our culture was pretty simple. We worked hard, and sometimes, after a brutal week, a bunch of us would go to the pub across the street. Not a mandatory fun thing, just an informal, we survived ritual. Roy would be there, nursing a single beer and telling war stories from old ad campaigns. It was a good place to work, stressful, but good. We were a team. Then, about a year ago, the agency got acquired by a bigger, more corporate entity. At first, not much changed. They gave us new computers and better health insurance. Nobody complained. Then came the corporate memos, emails full of buzzwords about synergy and optimizing our brand identity. Mostly ignorable stuff. The first real sign of trouble was the announcement. We were getting a new dedicated HR manager for our branch. Her name was Taylor. The email described her as a dynamic expert in fostering inclusive and forward-thinking workplace cultures. A collective groan went through the office. We'd never needed an HR person breathing down our necks before. If we had a problem, we talked to the director. Problem solved. A few weeks later, she arrived. Taylor was in her late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a sharp, sterile pantsuit that looked more expensive than my car. She had this fixed, overly enthusiastic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She walked through the studio like an anthropologist studying a newly discovered tribe. Her first official act was to call a mandatory all-hands meeting. We all gathered in the main conference room. She stood at the front, beaming at us. She talked for an hour straight. I've never heard so many corporate buzzwords strung together in my life. She was going to help us interrogate our unconscious biases. She was here to dismantle legacy systems of power. She wanted to create a brave space where everyone felt psychologically safe. I looked over at Roy. He was just staring at her, completely expressionless, like he was watching a strange nature documentary. Most of us just wanted to get back to our desks. We had a deadline for a beverage company, and their logo wasn't going to design itself. Her speech ended with a promise to reevaluate all existing internal processes and rituals to ensure they align with our new company values. We had no idea what that meant, but it sounded ominous. The first casualty was the pub. Taylor sent out a memo explaining that after-work activities centered around alcohol could be exclusionary to people who don't drink and could perpetuate a toxic boys' club culture. Our informal Friday drinks were now officially discouraged. Nobody stopped us, but the memo put a chill on it. Attendance dwindled. It felt like we were doing something wrong. Next came the listening sessions, mandatory one-on-one meetings with her in her new sterile office. My session was deeply uncomfortable. She asked me a bunch of leading questions. Have you ever witnessed behavior that made a colleague feel uncomfortable? Do you feel the men in the office dominate conversations and meetings? Are female voices being given the same weight as male voices? It felt like an interrogation. I just gave vague, non-committal answers. I said everyone was professional and I had no issues. The look she gave me was one of disappointment, like I was part of the problem and didn't even know it. It became clear very quickly who Taylor's chosen people were. There was a young designer, Aubrielle. She was okay at her job. Not great, not terrible. But she was ambitious. Aubrielle immediately latched on to Taylor. She started using the same buzzwords in meetings. She would talk about how a certain color palette wasn't inclusive enough, or how a font choice felt aggressively masculine. Taylor ate it up. Suddenly, Aubrielle was being invited to high-level meetings. Her ideas, which were often mediocre, were praised by Taylor as innovative and thoughtfully aligned with our core values. Meanwhile, the guys in the office started walking on eggshells. A joke that would have been fine a few months ago now felt like a risk. The easy back-and-forth banter that fueled our creativity died down. The office became quieter, more tense. You could feel people measuring every word before they said it. Taylor implemented mandatory monthly sensitivity training seminars. They were awful. Just an hour of her standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation filled with stock photos of diverse people smiling. She would present scenarios. A male colleague compliments a female colleague's dress. Is this workplace harassment? A manager assigns a difficult project to a male employee instead of a female employee. Is this evidence of unconscious bias? The answer to every question was always, yes, it could be. It was designed to make you paranoid, to see malice and oppression in every single interaction. The guys would sit in the back, silent. Any attempt to add nuance or context was shut down. She'd say things like, "It's not a woman's job to educate you," or, "That sounds like you're trying to defend problematic behavior." It was a kangaroo court where you were guilty before the trial even started. The atmosphere turned sour. The natural camaraderie we had was gone, replaced by suspicion. A clear divide was forming. It was Taylor and her small circle, mostly the younger women like Aubrielle, on one side. On the other side was everyone else, just trying to do their jobs. Roy, in particular, had no time for any of it. He openly ignored her memos. During her seminars, he'd just sit in the back, sketching in his notebook, not even pretending to listen. He wasn't rude to her directly. He just treated her like she was an irrelevant distraction from the real work. You could tell it drove Taylor crazy. He was a living relic of the old ways she was so desperate to dismantle. He was respected for his skill, not his politics. He represented a threat to her authority. She couldn't touch him, though. He was too valuable. Our biggest clients loved him and often requested him specifically. So she just watched him, waiting. The whole situation came to a head a few months after she started. We were in the middle of a huge pitch for a new sports drink company. The client was known for being edgy, aggressive, and very masculine in their branding. The whole team was throwing ideas around in the main project room. It was a high-pressure environment. The deadline was tight. Different designers were pinning their concepts to the board. Aubrielle went up to present her concept. It was fine. Clean, professional, technically competent. But it was incredibly safe. It looked like a design for a vitamin water, not an extreme sports drink. There was a polite silence after she finished her presentation. Nobody wanted to be the one to criticize Taylor's favorite. The director looked around the room, waiting for feedback. Finally, Roy spoke up. He hadn't said a word the whole meeting, just stood in the back with his arms crossed, studying the board. He didn't raise his voice. He just stated it like a fact. "It's not going to work." Aubrielle looked flustered. "What's wrong with it?" Roy walked up to the board and pointed. "There's no energy here. It's timid. This client's brand is all about power, impact. This is too soft, too gentle. It needs more guts. It needs more balls." And that was it. That was the word that sealed his fate. In the context of the room, everyone knew exactly what he meant. He was using a common figure of speech to mean courage, boldness. He'd said it 100 times before in reviews. But the world had changed. Taylor was in the room. I saw a flicker of something in Taylor's eyes, a little spark of victory. Obrielle put on a performance of being deeply offended. She stammered something about how that was inappropriate and gendered language. Roy just looked at her, bewildered. He wasn't a guy who kept up with the latest social justice terminology. He was trying to give her honest, direct feedback to help her win a client. He tried to explain. It's a metaphor, for Christ's sake. It means it needs to be stronger. But Taylor stepped in, her voice dripping with faux concern. Roy, I think we can express that sentiment without resorting to exclusionary and frankly anatomical language. Let's remember to keep this a safe and respectful environment for everyone. The meeting just fell apart after that. The creative energy was gone. The director, sensing disaster, quickly wrapped things up. The next morning, Roy wasn't at his desk, which was weird. Roy was never late. Around 10 a.m., we all got an email from Taylor. Subject line, an important update on our team. It was a short, cold corporate message. It said that Roy was no longer with the company, effective immediately. It wished him well in his future endeavors. It finished by reminding everyone of the company's zero-tolerance policy for non-inclusive behavior, and provided a link to the official code of conduct. A wave of shock and disbelief went through the studio. People were just staring at their screens. They fired Roy? Roy, who had been with the company for 20 years. Roy, who had mentored half the people in this room, all for a single word he said while trying to do his job? It felt like a public execution. The message was crystal clear. None of us were safe. If they could do that to Roy, they could do it to anyone. Fear is a powerful tool. The office, which had already been quiet, became a morgue. Nobody talked about anything other than work. All personal conversations stopped. People kept their heads down, did their tasks, and went home. The guys especially were terrified. We communicated in nods and silent glances. Taylor, meanwhile, was acting like she had won a major battle. She was more confident, more assertive. She and Obrielle would walk through the studio, talking and laughing, while everyone else sat in stony silence. They were the new power structure. About a week after Roy was fired, Taylor called another all-hands meeting. Her mood was triumphant. She stood at the front of the room with that same fixed smile. She talked about the recent, though difficult, transition the team had gone through. She said it was a necessary step to realign our culture with our stated values. Then she unveiled her grand new idea. She said she understood that even with the recent changes, some people might still feel unsafe or unwilling to report problematic behavior directly. She said that systems of power often silence the voices of the marginalized. So, to combat this, she was introducing a new tool for total transparency and accountability. She pointed to a corner of the room. There, on a small table, was a sleek black box with a slot on the top. It looked like a fancy suggestion box. This, she announced dramatically, is the anonymous complaint box. She explained that anyone could write down a complaint about anything or anyone, drop it in the box, and she would personally review the contents at the end of each week. It's completely anonymous, she assured us. This is your chance to speak truth to power without fear of retaliation. This is how we will root out the last remnants of the old toxic culture. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering for a moment on me and some of the other senior male designers. The implication was obvious. This box was for us. It was a weapon, and she was pointing it directly at our heads. She expected it to be filled with complaints about the men in the office. She thought she was going to get a flood of anonymous tips about microaggressions, mansplaining, and all the other sins she was so obsessed with. She finished her speech, clearly very proud of herself. We were dismissed. People filed out of the conference room in silence. I walked back to my desk, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. They had fired our best designer, destroyed our morale, and now they were installing a secret police box so we could snitch on each other. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. Roy was a good man. He was a great designer. He didn't deserve to have his career and reputation destroyed like that. I sat there, staring at the black box in the corner. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Taylor's smug, self-satisfied face flashed in my mind. She was so sure she was the hero of this story, so certain that she was on the right side of history. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. I looked at the box again. Completely anonymous, she had said. A strange thought started to form in my head. An idea. A dangerous, beautiful idea. What if Taylor's new weapon could be turned against her? I looked around the silent office. I saw the same anger and frustration I felt reflected in the faces of my colleagues. They were beaten down, but they weren't broken. We had all been silenced, but she had just given us a voice, an anonymous voice. And we had a lot to say. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the last few months, the good-natured chaos of the old office replaced by this cold, sterile silence. Roy's empty desk, a monument to the new regime. Taylor's smug, condescending smile. The black box sitting in the corner, waiting to collect names for the next purge. I got out of bed, went to my computer, and opened a blank document. What to write? I couldn't just write, "Taylor is a tyrant." It had to be professional. It had to be undeniable. I had to use her own corporate language against her. I started typing. To whom it may concern, this is an anonymous complaint regarding the conduct of HR Manager Taylor. I laid it all out, point by point. I described the immediate and negative impact her policies had on team morale and creative collaboration. I detailed how her sensitivity training seminars fostered an environment of suspicion and paranoia rather than inclusion. I wrote about the clear and observable favoritism shown to certain employees, like O'Briel, while others were consistently ignored or treated as adversaries. I described the firing of Roy. I was careful with the wording. I didn't call it unjust. I called it a disproportionate disciplinary action that has created a palpable sense of fear among senior staff, discouraging open and honest professional critique, which is essential to our creative process. I concluded by stating that the person responsible for creating a safe psychological space had, in fact, become the primary source of workplace anxiety and hostility. I read it over. It was cold, factual, and lethal. The next morning, I printed it out at home, folded the paper into a small square, and put it in my pocket. Walking into the office felt different. I had a mission. The box was just sitting there, unassuming. A black hole waiting to consume secrets. Taylor was walking around with a coffee mug, talking to O'Briel. She glanced at the box and smiled, like she was proud of her creation. I waited for my moment. I went to the coffee machine, waited until no one was looking directly at me, and then took a slightly longer route back to my desk. My heart was pounding. It felt ridiculous, like I was a spy in a cheap movie. With a quick, fluid motion, I walked past the table and dropped the folded paper into the slot. It made a soft, barely audible thump as it hit the bottom of the empty box. I didn't look back. I just sat down at my desk and stared at my screen, pretending to work. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. But I felt a small sense of relief. I had done something. I had fought back in the only way I could. For the first day or two, my note was probably the only thing in there. I would see Taylor walk past the box, and she'd almost seem disappointed that it was so empty. The idea needed to spread, but I couldn't just announce it. I found my opportunity with one of the other senior guys, a good designer who had worked closely with Roy for years. We were the only two in the kitchen, grabbing coffee. We were just making small talk about a project. As we were leaving, I nodded towards the main office floor, in the vague direction of the box. "Crazy times, huh?" I said, keeping my voice low. He just nodded grimly. I paused for a second, then said, "You know, she made a big deal about that thing being for everyone, completely anonymous." I looked him in the eye for just a second, and I saw a little spark of understanding. I didn't say anything else. I didn't have to. I just went back to my desk. Later that afternoon, I saw him take the same detour past the box on his way back from the printer. Another soft thump. The next day, I heard two of the younger guys talking quietly by the water cooler. One of them said something about being afraid to give honest feedback in meetings now. The other one just said, "There's a place for that now." And he subtly glanced towards the box. It was happening. The idea was a seed, and in the toxic soil Taylor had created, it was growing fast. A silent grassroots rebellion was taking shape. No meetings, no secret pacts. Just a shared understanding among the disenfranchised. We were all living under the same oppressive regime, and we had all been handed the same weapon. Even some of the women started to catch on. There was a woman in accounting who had been friends with Roy. She hated what happened to him. I saw her drop a note in. Another female designer, who had been at the company almost as long as I had, was constantly having her ideas shot down by Taylor in favor of Aubriel's. I'm pretty sure she wrote something too. This wasn't about men versus women. It was about the entire office versus Taylor. Meanwhile, Taylor's behavior became even more insufferable. She seemed to believe her own propaganda. She'd make comments in meetings like, "I'm so pleased with the shift in our conversational dynamics. It feels much more respectful now." She was mistaking fear for respect. She and Aubriel were inseparable. One afternoon, they were having a loud conversation near my desk. Taylor was telling Aubriel that her innate understanding of non-hierarchical creative structures was exactly what the company needed. It was pure, unadulterated nonsense. But the worst part was the box. She started treating it like a pet project. She'd walk past it and lightly tap the top, a smug little smile on her face. She was so confident, so utterly convinced that it would be filled with evidence to support her worldview. She probably imagined notes reading, "Spencer keeps interrupting me," or "The men are creating a hostile environment with their inside jokes." She thought she was collecting ammunition for her next wave of purges. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. By Wednesday, I noticed the sound had changed. When someone dropped a note in, it wasn't a thump anymore. It was a soft rustle as the new paper landed on the growing pile of others. The box was filling up. The end of the week was approaching. Friday was the day she said she'd open it. The atmosphere in the office was electric with unspoken tension. It was like the whole studio was holding its breath. We were all thinking the same thing. What was going to happen? Would she actually read them? Would she show them to the director? Or would she just quietly throw them away if they weren't what she wanted to see? Friday arrived. It was a slow, agonizing day. Every time Taylor walked past, my stomach clenched. Finally, at 4 p.m., the email landed in our inboxes. Subject: Weekly Accountability and Transparency Session. The email summoned all of us, including the studio director, to the main conference room. As promised, it read, "We will be reviewing the anonymous feedback provided by the team." This was it, Judgment Day. We all filed into the conference room. It was dead silent. The director was already there, sitting at the head of the table. He looked bored, like this was just another pointless HR meeting he had to endure. Taylor stood at the front of the room, next to a small table. On the table was the black box. She was beaming, radiating an aura of self-satisfaction. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice full of theatrical gravity. "This is a very important moment for our team. For the past week, we have provided a channel for open and honest communication, free from fear, a way to give a voice to the voiceless." She looked around the room, making eye contact with a few of the women, as if to say, "I did this for you." Our director is here to bear witness to this process, to ensure we take every piece of feedback with the seriousness it deserves. The director just gave a slight nod, his expression unchanged. He clearly wanted this to be over with, so he could start his weekend. Taylor produced a small key from her pocket. She held it up for all to see. "And now, let's see what we've learned this week." She inserted the key into the lock on the box. She turned it with a dramatic click. She lifted the lid. She reached inside, her smile unwavering. She was expecting to pull out a handful of notes. Her hand stopped. Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second. The box was much fuller than she expected. She pulled her hand out, holding a thick stack of folded papers. Dozens of them. She placed the stack on the table. Her confident smile returned, though it looked a little more strained now. "Wow," she said with a nervous laugh. "It seems many of you had a lot to say. This is wonderful. This is engagement." She picked the first note off the top of the pile. She unfolded it slowly, deliberately. She held it up to read, still facing us. We couldn't see what was written, but we could see her face. We watched as the color drained from it. Her smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. Her eyes widened slightly. Her mouth hung open for a second. She quickly looked down at the paper again, as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. There was a long, awkward silence. The director shifted in his seat. "Well, what does it say, Taylor?" Taylor looked up, flustered. It's nothing," she stammered. "Just a procedural question." She quickly refolded the paper and placed it face down on the table, separate from the main pile. She tried to regain her composure, forcing another smile. "Okay, let's see what's next." She picked up the second piece of paper. She unfolded it. The same thing happened. This time, the look on her face wasn't just shock. It was anger. A dark flush was creeping up her neck. "What's going on?" the director asked, his voice now laced with impatience. It appears to be another personal comment," she said through gritted teeth. She put that note down on top of the first one. She grabbed a third note, unfolding it much more aggressively this time. She stared at it. Her face was now a mask of pure fury. She looked up, her eyes scanning the faces of the men in the room, searching for the culprits. "This is a joke," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "This is not constructive feedback. This is a coordinated personal attack." The director stood up. "Let me see those," he said, his voice low and firm. He walked to the front of the room. Taylor tried to cover the notes. "It's not necessary. This is clearly an abuse of the system." He didn't argue. He just reached down and took the 3 notes she had read. He read the first one. His eyebrows shot up. He read the second one. His expression hardened. He read the third one. He looked from the note to Taylor, and then to the huge pile of unread complaints still on the table. Without a word, he reached out and took the entire stack. "Let's go back to my office," he said to Taylor. His voice was cold, devoid of all emotion. "But the meeting," Taylor sputtered. "The transparency." "The meeting is over," he said. He turned and walked out of the conference room, holding the mountain of complaints. Taylor stood there for a moment, completely stunned. Her face was a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. She had been publicly, utterly defeated by her own creation. She shot one last, venomous glare at the rest of us before scurrying out of the room after the director. The door clicked shut behind her. For about 10 seconds, the room was completely silent, and then someone in the back started to chuckle. It was a quiet, nervous sound. Then someone else joined in. Within a minute, the entire room had erupted. It wasn't loud, triumphant laughter. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. People were grinning, shaking their heads, looking at each other with a shared sense of victory. We had done it. We had actually done it. We never saw Taylor again. The door to the director's office remained closed for the rest of the day. We heard from the receptionist later that she was seen leaving the building with her personal belongings in a box. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. On Monday morning, she was just gone. Her nameplate was gone from her office door. An email from the director simply stated that Taylor had decided to pursue other opportunities. We all knew what that meant. The black complaint box also vanished over the weekend. No one ever mentioned it again. Obrielle was like a deer in the headlights for weeks. Without Taylor to champion her, she was just another designer. Her buzzword-filled speeches stopped. She kept her head down and, for the first time, just did her work. The recovery was slow. You can't undo months of tension and fear overnight. But bit by bit, the old office started to return. The quiet, cautious whispers were replaced by actual conversations. Someone made a joke, and people laughed without looking over their shoulders. The creative energy, the collaborative spirit that Taylor had tried so hard to crush, began to bubble back to the surface. A few weeks later, after we successfully landed that sports drink account, with a much bolder design, a few of us ended up at the old pub. It wasn't planned. It just happened. We sat there, raising a glass. Nobody said what we were all thinking. Nobody mentioned Taylor or the box. We just toasted to Roy. Looking back, the whole thing feels surreal. Taylor came in like a crusader, so convinced she was the hero fighting a great evil. She saw toxicity and oppression everywhere she looked, so she built a weapon to hunt down the monsters she imagined were lurking in every corner. It just never occurred to her to turn that weapon on herself. She was so obsessed with finding fault in everyone else, she couldn't see the one person who was actually creating a toxic, hostile, and fearful environment. She wanted a witch hunt. She just never thought she'd be the one tied to the stake.